Welcome to the White and Blue Podcast. I'm Doug Goodnow, and my co-host is Colleen McGinnis. We are here to tell the interesting stories of Hillsdale College alumni, or more accurately, help them share their own stories. Here's a little bit about today's guest.
Jenny Brewer Pridgeon from the class of 2008 is one of several alumni who work in the college admissions office. With Hillsdale's growing academic reputation, learn more about the college admissions process. Jenny is ready to offer tips and advice to help alumni prepare their children to follow in their footsteps as Hillsdale College students. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today.
It was my pleasure. Thanks for having me.
So I have had the privilege of working with you for a number of years before I came to the alumni side. Yes. So it is especially fun to have you today and also to talk about one of my favorite subjects since it was half my career so far is admissions. So, All right. So first of all, I would love to talk about the college's reputation and how it has increased exponentially since I applied. And that I remember distinctly when I applied, we had an 86% admit rate. I remember I would sit in the library and open the college guidebooks, and I didn't look on websites. I read the books. And there's 86%. I was like, well, I can definitely do that.
Yes.
And we've really considerably dropped. Where are we now? And what would you attribute that huge success to in large part?
That's a great question. So, compared to the 86%, now this last year we were at just over 20%. So 21% admit rate for the fall 2024 class. And I think there are a number of things that have contributed to that rising profile. I would say the big jump in that profile came right around the time of COVID. And our commitment to in-person classes was a huge thing. And I know a deciding factor for a handful of students or for a number of students who came that fall. But I think also it sort of brought us into a spotlight where people could see the difference between our commitment to the classical liberal arts and highlighted a lot of those really valuable things through the lens of us having this commitment to in-person classes. So, our commitment to the liberal arts hasn't changed at all. It didn't start 5 years ago, but I think the spotlight on us changed a little bit. And then you see the value of this sort of education, especially compared to colleges that are maybe less interested in that commitment. Especially in the last handful of years.
I'm going to ask the most generic of questions here when it comes to admissions, but it's, I think very relevant. What does your office look for in an applicant? What is your ideal Hillsdale College applicant?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think the way I describe it is that we really want a student, Dr. Arn uses this phrase a lot, we want students who are willing and able. And that first word, or the second one, able, is the first thing I look for, is can the student do the work of the academics here, because that is a huge part of your time and a really important aspect when applying to colleges. We don't want to admit students just to have them fail. That's not fair for them either. And so we look at their academic profile. Do we think they can do the work here? And then do they want to do the work here? That's the willingness piece. And are they up for hard conversations where we don't just echo each other's thoughts, where we say, oh, why do you think that? Like, that's so interesting. And I use the example a lot when I talk to students where I had to take my fellow students' ideas seriously because I saw the way that they lived. And so when you live in such close proximity to students and you realize like, oh, I can't vilify this person's ideas just because they're different from mine, because I see how they treat the people next to them or their neighbor or, their professor. And so you have to say, oh, wow, okay, this person's ideas really do matter to them. And it's led to these choices that they're making that are commendable. And so I can't just dismiss it. I have to take it seriously. And I think that was a really big, piece in that's what we're looking for from students is can they handle this sort of conversation of why do you think this thing?
And a lot of that is off the paper. Like you can't get that from an admissions application or an online form now, right? So it's more about challenging and validating the applicant, correct?
I think so. I mean, that's a big part of it. Your application certainly needs to suggest all those things. And we look for, strong letters of recommendation that do suggest that students are good at, being challenged, or they are good friends, not just good students. And so we look for a lot of things in the application that all point to each other. So there's a very consistent application is what we're looking for. So this first, what we call sort of hurdle of the academic profile, and then the second hurdle of everything else. And now there's this third hurdle, now that we're in this new sort of increased profile, and that's you have to be of the best. And so even though we might say, yes, you can do the work here, and wow, yes, everything in your application would suggest that you're a consistent person, then we just take the strongest of those people who get past those first two hurdles. So that's been the hardest part for me as an admissions counselor in the last 4 or 5 years, is that we're not saying no to just the students who can't do it. We're saying no to a lot of students who can, and that's really tough.
So that's where my role, I think, in large part as alumni director and then past roles, in admissions kind of converge a little, because I'm familiar with this and very sympathetic to your challenge, because it's very hard to turn down people who are great and can do the work, and they can. But then when I'm working with alumni, obviously they have kids that are in that boat, and it's hard, to maintain those relations and help them understand that this place that they care about so much is, just maybe not a possibility, at least right now, for their son or daughter. So if you can, anything we can do to kind of proactively help alumni and families in this situation, it's one reason why we wanted to do this podcast in particular.
Yes.
So in the same vein, how can a student or family thinking ahead, maybe they're not applying now, they're 3 or 4 years down the road, how can they work on building the strongest application?
Yeah, I think a couple of things. First, taking it seriously. And not just saying, oh, I went here, so, they'll be fine. I think taking every bit of it seriously, the essays, putting together a resume that is as thorough as possible, making sure they, get a couple people to read over their essays and things like that. Prioritizing a campus visit where they can get an admissions interview where we can see that this student really wants Hillsdale. I think sometimes the challenge with alumni is that alumni have this love of Hillsdale, and they know what it could do for their student, and they see that this is a perfect fit for their student. And I think in many ways it probably is, but then we don't get that same sort of interest level from the student themselves. And so making sure that we can see that, oh, this isn't just something that their parents want. This is something that they want too. And I think that's most easily seen in the interview, though that's not the only place to see it. We have short answer questions that are much more specific to Hillsdale, and so they can express, their fit with Hillsdale through those answers. But I think an interview is a really top-notch way for them to show that they themselves want what Hillsdale offers.
So if a prospective student of an alum gets turned away,
yes,
there's some options there. Some of these parents are very tenacious, and so what are some options for these parents and the students who really want to get in, don't get in initially? I know there's a wait list.
Sure.
There's some other things. Kind of talk about, there may be a road to Hillsdale.
Yes.
But not the traditional way of just getting in right out of high school.
Sure. Yeah. So if our answer isn't a straight deny, but is actually a deferred or a wait list decision, those students still have a chance. And I think expressing that despite this sort of discouraging initial answer, they're still interested in Hillsdale is a really good way to respond. Hearing from the student themselves and not the parent is also really great. And then any sort of, talking to their admissions counselor and saying, okay, is there anything else I can do? And their admissions counselor can walk them through those steps if there are any. If the answer is no, which I know is, particularly challenging, then students who are interested in reapplying have a couple of options. They can apply for the spring semester, which, maybe if their test score or their GPA wasn't quite as strong, that doesn't give them a lot of time to strengthen that part of their application, because by the time they apply, they will not have completed a whole semester elsewhere. So I would say if the academic profile is maybe the thing that kept them from having a successful application, waiting until the following fall would be better, because then at least we'd have one semester to go off of. And I would also encourage students, end up somewhere where you could see yourself potentially in case our decision is no again, which I hope it isn't, but if it is, you don't want them to have to uproot their relationships and the life that they've started to build, and just to start over again. So I try to encourage them, make sure that they choose a good place in the meantime, and then, maybe give yourself more than one semester if you need to strengthen your academic profile.
When I was in admissions, I remember there's always a couple of stories every year of kids that didn't get in, and students, and they did everything they could. They did everything that we asked them to, and they usually did, a year later or whatever. And those are our neat success stories. Probably harder now, I'm sure, because it is still more competitive. But it's always fun to see that, and so there's always hope, right?
Oh, for sure. And we have a couple students coming in this spring who I think this was their second, kind of try, and they were successful. So it certainly does. It does happen. I just don't want you to put all your eggs in that one basket.
So back to the interview.
Yes,
you mentioned that is a way to really enhance an application. And I know it's not required, but highly recommended.
Highly recommended.
And what sorts of things are you looking, how should a student prepare for an interview?
Yeah, I think it can be intimidating because it's possible that the student has never had to interview before. And so I know a lot of students who feel like, oh no, I don't even know what to do. I don't want to do that. But I would say, I oversee 10 admissions counselors, and they're all super kind. And their goal is not to intimidate a student. Their goal is to try to figure out what is important to the student, why they're interested in college in general, not just Hillsdale, to ask questions that make them think. And not necessarily to see, do they have the right answer, or do they have a Hillsdale answer? Do you know the answer to this really hard question is not the goal. The goal is to figure out, okay, how well do they handle questions that they don't know the answer to? Do they seem comfortable or at least interested in things outside their main interest? Because you're going to have to take the core. And so if you hate everything except the one thing that you love, half your time here, you're not going to like, right? And so trying to figure out this fit with the core, how well do you like to talk about things? Not that you have to be chatty, but are you up for conversation? And we're really just trying to figure out kind of the life behind those pieces of paper that they've submitted or will submit soon.
So it's less of a right answer all the time, as more of a how are you thinking, and
definitely
who are you? And
yes.
Okay.
Definitely.
So test taking. Back in my day, it was the ACT, SAT.
It's gotten more complicated.
You take it one. Tell me about it. You take it once, and you feel like you're good as long as it's not horrible.
Right.
Now, obviously, it's a lot different.
Yes.
And now we've got things called the classical learning test.
Mm-hmm.
So I know Hillsdale is considered test optional. So
yes.
Tell me a little bit about that, and then how the classical learning test is affecting maybe your process in admissions.
That's a great question. So during COVID, there were a number of states that were not offering standardized tests. So we introduced the test optional policy, which is a kind of a common thing among higher education these days. And so we kind of jumped on that. And it was really great because we were able to admit students who just couldn't get the test. And now, most students can, or every student can, but there are still a handful of students where, testing is not the way, it's not reflective of their academic ability. They have a 4.0 and then their test score is not reflective of that. So we like that it gives us the option, that gives students an option to present a really competitive application without that one thing that really brings them down. But we also, I would say that we are test preferred, and that we like more information as opposed to less. And that if you don't submit a test score, we're going to look more carefully at those other things that you can submit. So taking a little bit of pressure off all those other things and putting them on a test score might be really helpful. And so taking the ACT, the SAT, or now the CLT is a really great opportunity for students to maybe strengthen that application. And the classical learning test, we're super pleased with. I mean, we think it's a great test. You read actual things from books, and then you answer questions about them. They're not things that are just made up for this test. But I think they find They find that students who have a classical education background do better on the CLT. The CLT does offer a free test online. So if students want to try it out and see how they do, we use their conversion chart. And so you can take it and you can say, oh, this number equals, a 32 ACT. I only got a 30 on the ACT, so I should take this for real, or vice versa. So we're happy to take any of the tests. We think the CLT is a really great option. But if the test isn't great for you, you don't have to submit it.
Yeah, that's great clarifications. I think that'll be really helpful to a lot of our alumni parents who are hopefully listening to this.
Yes.
So in your experience, I guess, what kind of students do better on the CLT, or is that a thing? I mean, is it target certain aspects of their academic history or background?
That's a good question. I do think the classically educated student generally does better because sometimes they may have even read those excerpts before. But we've seen students do well even without that background.
Okay.
So the creators of the test, and I'm not going to be able to think of the word, but the creators of the test think that it's not right that a student can study and do better on the ACT or SAT than they did before. That's not the right sort of test. It's supposed to test their ability, not what they know. And so I think the CLT is more geared toward that, okay, let's see how you think and do you have good comprehension? It's more the underlying skills than it is the actual thing. And so I think that seems to be working, but I don't know that it always, fits perfectly with each student.
That's great. And would you say, I know it's new, so you may not have, we may not have a lot of data on this yet, but is it a pretty good predictor, would you say, of success at Hillsdale?
It seems to be, yeah. Okay. Similarly to the other tests, but also a good predictor.
Okay, I think we're going to take a little break, and we'll be right back with the White and Blue podcast.
Hillsdale College is a small, Christian, classical liberal arts college that operates independently of government funding, and we want you or your son or daughter to apply. At Hillsdale, students grow in heart and mind by studying timeless truths in a supportive community dedicated to the highest things. Hillsdale College costs significantly less than other nationally ranked private liberal arts colleges and receives regular recognition as a best value, and nearly all students receive financial aid. Our robust core curriculum, vibrant student life, and 8-to-1 student-to-faculty ratio make for an education like no other. For more information or to fill out an application, visit hillsdale.edu/info. That's hillsdale.edu/info.
Now it's time for the Hillsdale History Minute, where we bring a slice of Hillsdale College history to the White and Blue podcast. For today's minute, did you know that freshmen at Hillsdale wore beanies or caps into the 1970s? Apparently, this was a tradition for many colleges and universities, and Hillsdale eventually followed. The freshman cap practice faded, and a 1977 article in the Collegian debated whether the tradition should be brought back. The verdict? No, though many were purchased as souvenirs. Welcome back to the White and Blue podcast. We're here today with Jenny Pridgeon from our admissions office. And Jenny, we had a great conversation, first part talking about all the ins and outs of Hillsdale College admissions, and we'll follow up on a few questions, but we want to get a little bit into your personal side too, as an alum, 2008 graduate. So tell us a little bit about your role in admissions.
Yeah, so I started in admissions, and when I started, Colleen had been here 2 years, I think. And so it was fun to join a team. There were only 5 of us then. And the maps that show our territories were just absurd. You're like, how in the world can you visit 14 states, and do actually in-depth recruiting in them? I think Colleen did the best of all of us, but
we all did
a lot to cover.
The counselors today are wimpy.
Oh, man. So I was an admissions counselor for 8 years, covering two different territories. And then I came back in 2016, not having left Hillsdale, but I'd moved to Colorado to recruit the West. And then I came back in 2016 to take over as director of field recruitment, which was a new position. And it's just really overseeing the counselors. There are 10 of them now. And usually 2 or 3 of them are new graduates and just entering the role. And so making sure that we're all talking about the same sort of thing, that we're continuing the strategies, that we've started for those territories. There's continuation from one counselor to the next. They have the professional development that they need. I do weekly meetings with them. We strategize on how they'll best, recruit their territories, which can vary pretty significantly. I shadow them a bit in the fall. And then we do a lot of different recruitment events that I'll help with. So it's a really great job. It's not quite as much travel as I used to do, which I miss. But now that I have a young daughter, it works out well.
So in that same vein, as regarding admissions counselors, how can a prospective family or student work best with their prospective student? Like how should they take advantage of their admissions counselor in their territory? And I think in my experience as an admissions counselor, but also in conversations with alums, I think sometimes it's really something they should know, but sometimes people just don't know that they have someone that they can work with or bounce things off as much as we try to tell them.
Right.
So how can they utilize that relationship in the best way for everyone?
Yeah, that's a great question. I think, if you want to reach out to them early on and get some specific advice about, what classes might be best or, what sort of involvements look better. I really think you ought to do what's most important to you, though. And that doesn't take as much feedback. You shouldn't do something just because it will get you into college if you can help it. But I do think that connecting with your admissions counselor eventually is really great because they're going to be the first person to read the applications from their territory. And so if they've been able to meet with a student and see from junior to senior year, they've made these decisions to, not lessen their rigor of coursework, that they've, taken advantage of these opportunities to be leaders in these certain ways, that, as the students have questions, their counselor can give them good advice so that they can make good decisions that not necessarily change the trajectory of their high school career, but maybe help them show the depth to which they've gotten involved or that they've challenged themselves. So having more information as opposed to less is always better. That doesn't mean that your counselor wants to hear from you, every week. But I think every few months, every 6 months, as you're kind of coming up in your high school career is great. And then, your senior year, trying to meet with your admissions counselor at least the one time to do the admissions interview is so nice. But then it also allows you, to have someone to contact if you're worried about your application status, if you want to make sure that certain things have gotten in, that you're seeing the same thing, that we're in the admissions office is seeing the same test score that you submitted. Just a lot of verification is good. All those things are super helpful.
And I would imagine you probably want it to be more of a student-driven process than a parent-driven process.
Sure. Now, I don't want that to sound like we don't like working with parents because we know, we're working with families that usually parents are really involved in making educational decisions and helping, lead their kids to good things. And so we don't want to imply that we don't want to talk to the parents. But this is a big decision that the students are going to have to make in the end. And they're going to be the ones that are going to have to engage with the professors and make choices once they get here.
Do the work.
Exactly.
Well, if parents are the dominant communication piece, that might be an indication, right? The student, right? So that's what I'm trying to give the parents here a little tip.
Yes.
Be involved, but not too involved because that could actually hurt potentially their students' application process.
Yeah. So. Oh, for sure. Yeah, if there have been certainly times in my career where we strongly suspect that it wasn't the student who wrote the essay, certainly not the student who's emailed us, a million times, but has been more the parent, that we much prefer it being a student-driven process, though we welcome involvement from the parent, certainly to a degree.
Okay, that's a great tip. So if you're listening, alumni parents, listen to Jenny.
You talked about doing things that the student is passionate about. I think when you get into the more competitive space in higher ed, you have a lot more pressure on the students.
Yes.
And parents and to do everything right and to take all the things and to be involved in as much as possible. And sometimes there's some students that's overwhelming,
Yes.
and maybe not the best course. I drove a kid home from the airport, a student, I'm sorry, I keep calling them kids. It's rude. A student home from the airport randomly last week, and she needed a ride. She's coming back for the second semester. And she explained how her track was a little different coming in to Hillsdale because her background was kind of, her parents moved because of their jobs. So it was harder to get involved in school. And then she was in a very small school. And so she got involved in beekeeping. And that was one reason she got involved in beekeeping, was for her college application, which was funny. And then she started talking about how passionate she was about beekeeping. She was a bee queen. And I mean, this kid was so cool to talk to.
Yes.
But you could tell she loved what she was doing.
Yeah.
And I think that is also what I've seen, with families is, they get real stressed out about this. And
yes.
So finding something, if you want to elaborate on that a little, just finding something that they're passionate about and can shine in,
yes,
is maybe more of a priority than filling their resume.
Yes, certainly. And I think some students, I don't want to speak badly about any involvement at all, but some parents are like, oh my gosh, my daughter finally made it into NHS, right? So has 98% of our student body, and so it's not, certain things just feel much more like checking a box. And I think there's this passion that comes through for students like this one that you spoke to, where, wow, beekeeping, that is cool. And then I think for some students, hearing something like that is also intimidating, because they're like, I'm only 17 years old. I don't have this thing that I'm super passionate about yet. And that's okay, So I think there's this balance of, when we look at a student's resume, specifically, we're looking at breadth, depth, and impact. And some students, they have a lot of breadth because maybe they haven't figured out the one thing they love yet. And so they just get involved and they spend their time well. And it's really fun to see all the different things that they participate in. And then some students, ballet, that is their thing. So not only do they take ballet lessons, but they teach ballet lessons and they volunteer for all these ballet camps or whatever it is. And so there's a lot of depth there, though maybe a little less breadth.
A lot of accomplishment.
Yeah, exactly. And so we're looking for a mixture of those people because we don't want every single person at Hillsdale to be in ballet necessarily, right? We want to have beekeepers. We want to have people who are involved politically or not involved politically or love to read or serve their family in significant ways. We love to see work experience. We love to see volunteerism. And so there are a lot of things that we like to see, but it's not just the one thing that we want. And so I think a lot of that should be driven by the students' interest. And it's fun because whatever you decide, whichever path you go down, if you're doing it because you want to do it, that comes through in the interview. And so we like to see those sorts of things because it's fun to talk about what you enjoy doing.
Well, we're going to put you on the spot here with an interesting question.
Okay.
What is your favorite admission story?
Okay, so I was recruiting Kansas City, and I ended up meeting this student in a school that I almost didn't go to. So I was going to be late to my flight, and I thought, I should probably just cancel this school. But I decided not to. Decided to go to this high school. Only one person had signed up, and this person signed up because Hillsdale Lake is where they used to canoe, I think. They'd never even heard of Hillsdale. All right. And so I end up talking to this kid. He ends up coming to Hillsdale. And every time I saw him, I was like, hey, how's it going? And he was like, living the dream, Jenny, living the dream. And so it was fun. And because he was really successful here, and it was neat because my efforts made a difference. I was the reason that he heard of Hillsdale. I helped, give him the story of Hillsdale so that he could make a decision. And I don't think I was the reason he came, but I was the reason he knew of us.
Real
and
impact.
Then, yeah, real impact. And it's fun to be able to see those things, where because I went to this random public school outside of Kansas City, this student had a great college experience. So there are lots of stories like that, but that's the one that comes to mind.
Sounds very providential.
Mm-hmm.
All right. So how have the students changed in your observation from your student and initial admissions years to now?
Oh, good question. I would say that there are a lot of similarities. I think Because our profile has ratcheted up, certainly sort of the type A student has increased, which I think, comes with its own challenges where, you're probably going to get a B at Hillsdale. And that can be demoralizing if you've never seen a B on a paper before. And so, I think the dean's offices do a great job of supporting the students that we have. And so I know that their focus has had to shift as our student body has shifted some. But I do think it's really fun because we don't have to beg anyone to come to Hillsdale. And in admissions, we can just tell the story as best we can. And usually the right students are compelled by that story. And I'm really grateful for that because there are a lot of colleges out there who just have to get anybody, and it doesn't matter who they are, and they just have to fill the seats. But because of who we are and because of our profile, we're able to tell the story of Hillsdale and compel the right students to come here, which means the experience at Hillsdale, I do think has stayed pretty constant over the last, 20 years that I've been involved here. Students are coming here because they want to be here. And then you can tell that in the way that they engage with the professors, in the way that they get involved in the campus community, and the things that they do after they leave Hillsdale is all very impressive and really beautiful.
The most popular question I hear talking to alumni, what's the enrollment? Where are you guys going to be for enrollment? We hear you're basically busting at the seams.
Right.
So what's the long-term goal for admissions and also enrollment at the college?
That's a great question and an answer I do not know. That's a lot of it's directed by Dr. Arnn and the administration. And I do know that where we're at right now, we're pretty much maxed out. We're maxed out in our classroom space. If you go to the cafeteria at noon, that we're maxed out there. We're maxed out pretty much in the dorms, the residence halls. And so I do think if we grow, it's going to require a decent capital investment and that we're going to have to grow in a number of ways. So I do think we're maxed out as much as we can. But then people ask all the time, if you have all these great applicants that you have to say no to, why wouldn't you grow? And that's a question that's been moving around, I would say, a long time. And I know Dr. Whalen at one point said that, we know that the size that we have works really well. And eventually, when something becomes bigger and bigger and bigger, eventually it's not what it was anymore. And we don't know what that point is. And so maybe we could grow to 2,000, no problem, right? Maybe we could go to 2,500, no problem. But for right now, with what we can handle, we're sort of maxed out. And I think, a decision to grow would have to be certainly above my pay grade, have to be made.
Well, it's a good, compelling argument, though, for a
right?
fundraiser.
Yes,
right
exactly.
All right. If you want to get bigger, you got to help support it. Let's go, alumni. All right. Just kidding. So I wanted to ask, you sort of touched on this a second ago. And so I was going to ask about freshman retention. So if we're recruiting the right students, how is freshman retention?
Yeah, so normally freshman retention is a number that is given to talk about how many freshmen stay from their first semester to their second semester. And that percentage has been about 97% over the last number of years, which is incredible. Like when you compare it against other colleges, the fact that we keep almost every student who comes here means that the right student is looking at Hillsdale. Admissions is doing a good job choosing the right student, and then student affairs and the professors and everything that's happening on campus is fulfilling the thing that we told the students would be here, so like fulfilling their expectations in a really, really, really great way.
Congratulations.
In context, another university I worked at, I know 70% freshman retention was considered outstanding for us.
Yeah.
So that number, Hillsdale's number is just
unheard of.
It's just astounding. Just for the alums out there that want a little bit of context.
Yes. Mm-hmm. And another number that's really impressive, I would say, would be our yield. So there's the number of applications that you get, and then the percentage that you accept. So for Hillsdale, that number, like I said, is in the low 20s. And then the percentage of students who from that 20% take us up on our offer has been around 60% for the last handful of years, 3 to 4 years. The national average is closer to 20%, sometimes even lower. And so if we're offering admission to these students and then they're accepting that offer, That's one reason why our admit rate is so low, is because we can't overextend offers of admission because we can't grow more than about 400 students in a freshman class.
That's great. Well, it's for, as an alum, it's a lot to be proud of, even with the problem of trying to get your kids in. It's just, there's a lot of great things to be very proud of. So you and your husband own and manage a large-scale pig farm nearby, and you have a little daughter.
Yes.
How do you balance work, motherhood, supporting the farm, and running a top-shelf admissions field team?
Oh, thanks for asking. I don't have much to do with the pig farm. My husband is the seventh generation on the farm. He likes to remind me that Pridgeon Farms is older than Hillsdale. It's true. It was founded in 1836, so 8 years to Hillsdale. And so my daughter is the 8th generation born on the farm, which is a very cool tradition. It's inspiring to see how hard they work. And I would say that it has, kind of pushed me to work hard myself. And so even though I'm not really feeding the pigs all that often, I do. It's fun to contribute to the community in this way, in a way that I see my husband's family doing all the time. So I would say that I don't balance it. I mean, I'm always wondering, am I balancing it as well as I should? Am I choosing the right things? Am I spending my time in the right ways? But I'm trying really hard to focus on what I'm doing at that moment and giving it my best. And I'm grateful to have such a strong office. I'm grateful to have 10 people who work for me who are just so great. They're willing to take on responsibility. They make good decisions. They're recruiting really great students. And so I would say that the people I work with and that are around me allow me to do what I do.
That's an outstanding answer. And
A+.
I expect none less from one of our great alums.
So last question, maybe the most important one, but maybe not. What would you say is the number one reason to attend Hillsdale?
Oh, okay. So my favorite reason why I think a student should be compelled at least to apply is because as a college, we believe that there is truth. And we're not saying that we always know what's true, right? That is a big question that's been asked for thousands of years. We're all trying to figure out what the answer to that question is. But to believe that there is an answer to that question gives an incredible purpose to your education. That if instead you would say, oh, you can think whatever you want to think, and I can think whatever I want to think, it doesn't really matter. We can both go on our merry way. Why in the world would you spend thousands of dollars to be told that, right? You don't need to go to college to be told you can think whatever you want to think. But if there is a right answer, and if knowing that answer changes the choices that you make, whatever they are, whether it's really important, like who you vote for or the person you marry or the kind of children you raise, or things that are not important at all, like do I buy a Snickers bar or a Kit Kat, right? But knowing and believing things impact every single choice we make, and we make choices all the time. And so believing that there is a right answer gives a reason to go to a college, and a college like Hillsdale, I think most of all.
Mic
Great
drop.
Answer. Wow. Well, I think we ended on a high note. Jenny, thank you so much for joining us today. And if people are interested, obviously, in the admissions process, they can reach out to you or a member of your fine team. And hopefully we can get as many alumni or students of alumni, I should say, to Hillsdale as we can.
I would love that. Yeah, I would love to talk to anyone who has questions. Thanks so much for having me. It was a blast.
Thanks again. For Colleen McGinnis, this is Doug Goodnow thanking you for joining us on the White and Blue Podcast. And may that spirit long remain.